I don't think Missouri fans should be worried about this football team. And I'm going to explain precisely what I mean coming up on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And yes, we've been rather light on hoops talk lately for understandable reasons, but I got to talk some basketball later on today's program, including my biggest questions for the 2024-25 campaign coming up here for Dennis Gates and company. First, I want to tell you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com. And I will say this Missouri season so far, the Tigers 4-1 in the top 25. You take a step back, and usually that's a pretty good start for most Missouri seasons historically. And yet it feels like most Tiger fans right now are fairly miserable. And this is something I was talking about in the offseason, something I was, a tiny bit concerned about. We'll talk about worry here as we go along and maybe the distinction here. But I think it's important that all of us don't forget that we need to live in the moment. And this is a really good time for some optimism and perspective, I think, because to me, worrying, it's been said many times, is sort of like wishing bad things into existence. For example, imagine one of my daughters in the next decade plus decides to attend the University of Missouri. Well, I could spend all of her 4 years of college worrying about all the bad things that could happen to her. Maybe she drinks too much. Maybe she gets into the wrong car and gets into an accident. A million different things I could spend literally 4 years of my life worrying about. But what if she has, and by the way, valid concerns, by the way, every single one of those concerns is valid on some level. But what if then she has the best possible time at Missouri she possibly could have? She's the valedictorian. She marries the man of her dreams. Missouri wins a national championship in football, and she gets to be on campus for it. Then what happened there under that scenario? Then did I just not quite literally manifest negativity into existence for those 4 years for absolutely nothing? And my point in bringing this up is because it's not as though it's impossible for Missouri to still make the college football playoff at this point. Heck, Missouri could still lose to Alabama. Heck, maybe beat Alabama, lose to Oklahoma, that type of deal. My point is go 10-2. Who knows what long and winding road the Tigers take to get there, but everything is still on the table. Now, if you have concerns about the Tigers, maybe your expectations are lowered a little bit, well, so are mine. That makes all the sense in the world. Having lowered expectations is different than worrying. Do you understand the distinction I'm trying to make here? And also on just the optimistic side. Well, let's look at Brady Cook, for example, a guy I've had some criticisms for the past few days. Well, the bottom line is there is reason to believe that Brady Cook can get better because, number one, he's done it before. That's one of the greatest proofs of concepts you can ever get is, yes, actual evidence in real life. We know Brady has it in him to go through stretches where he's throwing dimes down the field to guys like Luther Burden and Theo Weiss. So I'm not predicting anything here. I'm just telling you the opposite predictions, the predictions of 100% doom and gloom. Well, that's going too far too. That's going just as far as any Pollyannas who's out there. I don't know that there are many Missouri Pollyannas out there at the moment, but there are some people out there, I'm sure, maybe a few people out there say, hey, everything's perfect. It's going to all turn around. I think those people are going too far as well. I just don't think any of us should just be so steadfast in our beliefs and our expectations that we let it color the present and honestly ruin the present. Every college football game, in my opinion, every Missouri football game in particular, is an opportunity to just have about as much fun as you can possibly have. Now, the Missouri-Texas A&M game was the opposite of that. I'll certainly grant you that. And here's the thing. It's not just Brady Cook. Of course, the whole team needs to get better. Luther Burden hasn't really totally gone off yet statistically, number one. He's got plenty of time to turn it around and have a huge season, the huge back end of the season. By the way, my rant about his body language from postgame, I'm over it. The body language thing, it's a new day. I'm past it. Luther Burden's what, 21 years old? You think I handled my emotions perfectly at 21? I don't even handle them perfectly at 41 on the golf course on occasion. So rant over. Day over. It's a new day. Luther Burden has a chance to be the leader that we need him to be for the rest of this season. The offensive line hasn't been good enough yet. There's also 2 new pieces on the left side of that offensive line. There's still time for that unit to mesh. We are 5 games deep into this season. College football is a silly, silly game, isn't it? Because you look at my hat, for those of you on YouTube right now, a Kansas City Royals hat. If you're 5 games into the regular season of Major League Baseball and you're making any conclusions whatsoever, people think you're a crazy person at this point. All these statistically minded people do, that's for sure. But somehow in college football, well, this is all we have. So people like me, we have to draw conclusions. What other choice do we have? But then on the other side of the ball, defensively, I don't know, maybe it really is as simple as being a little bit more aggressive. Bringing some of the Blake Baker blitzing style back to the Missouri defense, maybe that will help the Tigers get loose a little bit more. I certainly could have seen a little bit more aggression against Texas A&M, no question about that. But I touched on expectations a little bit, and I mentioned the Kansas City Royals just a minute ago. Of course, the Royals lost to the Yankees last night in a bit of a heartbreaker, 3-2. The Royals now behind the 8 ball, down 2-1 in a 5-game series. And my point in bringing this up is just the different levels of pressure from me as a fan of the Chiefs, the Royals, and the Tigers. I think Missouri fans like myself, we put a lot of pressure on this season, not just on the team, but on ourselves for all intents and purposes. Whereas as a Chiefs fan, well, the Chiefs, I think, got off to a similar start as Missouri. They were 4-0, but, you had some question marks for sure. But yet the level of angst for me and Chiefs fans, I think, is just totally different, even though, of course, I'm the exact same person. So what explains that? Well, it's pretty simple. It's a little thing called 3 rings in your pocket if you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan. That tends to take the pressure off quite a bit. I can tell you that from experience now, having lived through it. And as a Kansas City Royals fan, even though I was a little bit disappointed, of course, that the Royals lost, I'm still feeling optimistic because the season's not over yet. Anything is possible, and why live in a world of negativity in the present when I don't know what's going to happen and I can't control it? And also, in 2014 and 2015, the Royals got 1 ring out of it, not 3 like the Chiefs, of course, but for me as a fan of baseball, that's as good of a Major League Baseball experience as you can have in those 2 years. So that really takes the pressure off as well. And I can just tell you that as a Chiefs fan, once again, the pressure release after these last 2 Super Bowls, not as great as the first one, for sure. But I'll tell you this, the ride was a heck of a lot more fun the last 2 years because, again, the pressure was just off. As Missouri fans, let's just take a step back, enjoy the ride, pop a couple beers, eat some chicken wings, and enjoy the Missouri-UMass football game for what it is. Because here's the thing. If in a few weeks Missouri ends up in the college football playoff somehow, you don't want to look back and go, man, that wasn't all that fun. We went 10-2, we're in the playoff. Why did I not enjoy this entire season? That's not the kind of experience you want to have. And frankly, it's all up to you in terms of upstairs here, folks. It's all up to you in terms of what kind of experience you're going to have in some ways. And if the Tigers are going to reach fan expectations and their own expectations, to be honest, inside of that locker room, well, it is time for a leader as a player to emerge. The time is absolutely now. There's no time to waste. And also, until Brett Norfleet, I think, gets 100% healthy, it might be time to take a different approach with tight end usage going forward, in my humble opinion. Let's talk about all that, but first let's also tell you that NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And I got to say, I've said this in other places on the Locked On Network, but worth mentioning here, to me, the Vanderbilt and Kentucky betting line, that is the weird line of the season so far. Kentucky, a 2-touchdown favorite, 13.5 to be exact, at home over Vanderbilt. Listen, I understand the Commodores are coming off the biggest win in their program's history, right? So, yes, the letdown potential is very much there, but 13.5? That's a bizarre line to me. One that I'm going to stay off of simply because I don't understand it. I just know that I'm going to be very curious to see what the outcome of that game is. Maybe you've got a side. Well, if you do, you got to check out FanDuel.com. Well, if anybody in the Missouri locker room has a Tim Tebow speech, now is the time to unleash it. And I'm not even kidding when I say that at all. Of course, I'm referring to 2008. Tim Tebow and the Florida Gators lost to Ole Miss in the regular season. Tim Tebow, after the game, had a passionate speech that later was dubbed The Promise, essentially. And while some people will sort of, go, roll their eyes because it's Tim Tebow or whatever, I'm telling you that is the type of moment that does rally a locker room together, no question. And it's easy, sure, they won the games, and it's easy to kind of in retrospect look back and go, aha, that was the moment where it did it all. Well, obviously Florida needed a lot of talent, some luck, and everything else that every champion of football needs to get to the promised land. So I understand all of that, but I also understand that when I was playing high school basketball, and I promise only spend the last 20 minutes of the show talking about my high school basketball career. I'm kidding, folks. But the point is, I remember what it was like to be young, and in retrospect, I wish I would have been more of a vocal leader back when I played high school sports. I mean, look at me now. I'm pretty vocal now talking into this here microphone. Clearly, I'm not exactly a wallflower. But back in my teenage days, I hadn't quite found my voice yet. I didn't exactly know who I was, what I wanted to say, this, that, and the other. Well, I don't know what it's like to play college sports, but I have a feeling that there's a lot of young men in that Missouri locker room who are similar to me. Maybe they have something to say. They just don't maybe know quite how to say it yet. They haven't quite found their voice yet, that type of deal. Well, I'm just telling you, there seems to be quite possibly a vacuum of leadership in the Missouri locker room. And if that's the case, if somebody's got something to say, it's time to step up and say it. Maybe it's your moment to seize leadership, all that good stuff. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's Luther Burden or it's Brady Cook or it's Christian Williams or it's somebody who's a redshirt freshman. It doesn't matter to me. Leadership comes in all shapes, sizes, and forms and ages and everything else. I just think at a certain point, it can't just be Eli Drinkwitz and the coaching staff trying to motivate. There has to be motivation that comes from the players themselves. And whoever that guy is, it's time to emerge. If you have it within you, let it out. Now, while all offseason it seems like the Missouri media and beat and the coaching staff that presumably is feeding them a lot of this information felt like the wide receiver group for Missouri was the best group on the team. And I'll say, without really criticizing Luther Burden or Theo Weiss, who I think have been quite good still so far for Missouri for the most part, other than that, the rest of the room really has not emerged yet so far in this season. I almost said this young season, but again, we're nearly halfway through the regular season at this point. So how young really is it? I will say, I've said early in this season I'd like to see somebody other than Mookie Cooper, who I think is much more of a veteran player who knows the offense, knows the defense, can find a hole on 3rd and 8, that type of deal, as he did in a key moment against Florida last season in a Missouri victory on that game-winning drive where Harrison Mevis hits the field goal. Cooper was a big part of that. But to me, throwing a guy who's maybe 5'6", 5'7", throwing it to him downfield is, well, it doesn't seem like that's the best use of his talents. Frankly, where is Josh Manning? Where's Daniel Blood? Where is Marquise Johnson? Where have these guys been? Where are they? Are they not better options to be hit downfield? I would argue that certainly they are, unless Manning, for example, has been a little bit overhyped so far as a redshirt freshman by the staff. Now, as far as the tight end position goes, Brett Norfleet's early injury for Missouri, I think, has thrown their plans really off kilter because, well, Norfleet has really not been involved at all in the passing game so far this season, outside of a target or two per game. I think I certainly was expecting Norfleet to be a much bigger part of this offense this season after breaking out, I thought, as the season went along last year. But I think that early shoulder injury has really hindered him because not only is Norfleet not really involved in the passing game, well, to my eyes at least, since coming back, Norfleet has not been particularly a physical blocker this season in the running game or the passing game so far. And frankly, I don't think Missouri on passing plays should be leaving Norfleet into block at this point. You saw on several occasions, as Jordan Rogers pointed it out on the broadcast, a lot of times the man-to-man linebacker on Norfleet would abandon that man-to-man principle as soon as he saw Norfleet staying in as a blocker. And I just don't know that that's a good use of Norfleet right now. Again, if he's physically compromised, as I believe he still is, I think that's affecting his blocking as much as anything. So to me, if you're going to have him out there, put him into a pass pattern, or else, frankly, have Jordan Harris or Tyler Stevens in there to help out more with pass protection and with the blocking game at this point, because I got to believe they're going to be more effective than Norfleet, who really isn't involved in the passing game at the moment. And coming up on the program, I want to talk some Mizzou basketball. How exactly is this team going to play out in 24-25? What are some of my biggest questions about the roster? And what can Dennis Gates maybe learn from Eli Drinkwitz? Let's talk about all that coming up in just a second. But first, Gametime is the place to get all of your last-minute ticket deals, including with a new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes it even easier to get into your favorite live events. Gametime Picks filters out all the nonsense, quite honestly, gives you exactly what you're looking for in terms of the best deals. And I tell you, Kansas City, New York Yankees tonight. Maybe I should start driving right now. Not too bad. All-in price to get in the building, $168, standing room only, or pay another $1 and you can actually get a ticket up in section 407. Doesn't sound too shabby to me. But regardless of whether it's baseball, theater, comedy, music, it's all about Gametime, the easiest place to get last-minute tickets and take the guesswork out of buying tickets. With Gametime, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. I knew post game after Texas A&M when Eli Drinkwitz took the very Gary Pinkel-esque approach of, hey, I take responsibility. It's all my fault. It's my responsibility. It's my fault. We got to get it corrected. All that good stuff. I knew that wasn't going to satisfy any fans out there. But honestly, what else is he supposed to say in that spot? It's simply Missouri's got to play better football. Anything that he says there is not going to satisfy anyone regardless. And to be brutally honest, I could use a little bit more of that Gary Pinkel approach from Dennis Gates right now. This offseason, Dennis Gates talking about, yes, how his goals are to make the Final Four. How about we win a game first in the SEC? How about that? Again, some of this is coach talk. You want to have big goals, fine and dandy. Again, maybe a little bit more Gary Pinkel, Bill Belichick in the offseason here from Dennis Gates and company wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But regardless, obviously a big chasm, a big spread, if you will, to borrow a trading phrase, to go from 0-19 versus, well, the previous year, Gates' first year, one of the best seasons, most memorable seasons in recent Missouri history for sure. So to me, my big questions about this team, obviously, who's going to play? Because a lot of guys on this Missouri roster, first of all, can you really play 10-plus guys, as Missouri tried to do last season? Maybe would have tried to do previously if he had enough depth. But this team has a bunch of guys who expect to play. For example, if you look at what I would call the definitely going to play guys, well, there's really 7 of them when you think about it. Tony Perkins, the transfer point guard from Iowa, Tamar Bates, Caleb Grill, Marquez Warwick, another transfer guard, Jacob Cruz, another transfer. You're sensing a pattern here, but all of these guys are upperclassmen who expect to play. Mark Mitchell from Duke, and of course the center, Josh Gray from South Carolina. That's 2 returners and 5 upperclassmen transfers that probably got pretty decent money in NIL, by the way. Certainly Mark Mitchell and Tony Perkins fit the bill, I can promise you that. So there's 7 guys who absolutely 100% expect to play. And then I'd say there are at least 3 more who are probablys, and that they're probably going to have to play some this season. One of them is Anthony Robinson, simply because other than Tony Perkins, who is the obvious backup point guard with any experience on this team, I would say Marquez Warwick is maybe a decent secondary ball handler for Missouri, but an actual lead ball handler, not really sure that I see that. So I think Robinson is almost certainly going to play a little bit by necessity. And same with the true freshman Peyton Marshall as well. If you're an everydayer, you know what a big fan of Marshall's potential I am. But I think even his true freshman season here, a guy who's gotten in much better shape in the offseason, I think not only is he the most obvious backup center on the roster, but I think he has a lot more offensive acumen and skill already, to say the least, frankly, than Josh Gray, who is a guy who's a big body, a big personality, a smart kid who can rebound, play defense, all that good stuff. But in terms of actually putting the ball in the basket and fitting the Dennis Gates mold of every single guy on the court being able to at least a little bit pass, dribble, and shoot, well, he doesn't really fit that mold. So I think at times Missouri and Dennis Gates is going to want to see what they have in Marshall inside. And also, quite honestly, does Mizzou go small fairly often with Mark Mitchell, for example, playing the 5? Not the center position, because Mitchell's not a center, but he could play the 5 and fake it a little bit. I think at times, for sure, I've seen highlights and moments of him playing good post defense for sure. So that doesn't strike me as impossible. I don't think that's something that Missouri's going to want to do all season, though, necessarily. I think the Tigers are going to try to be better defensively, have more size this season, be better on the boards. But at the same time, I think we all realize that offense is Dennis Gates' number one priority. So I do think it's going to be really interesting to see how Missouri uses Josh Gray, Peyton Marshall, how much they go small and play forwards at that spot. Could it maybe be Mark Mitchell and 4 guards on occasion, considering Honor Boateng, for example, another guy who I think will probably be in the rotation. How much is he going to play too? A guy who's 6'5", has good size there. Could he, make a Kim English type of imitation from all those years ago now, 2012, when Missouri played small to very effective offense for that season? But that also leaves 5 guys on the Missouri roster who I would say are probably knots, at least for this season, including an upperclassman in Aiden Shaw, his junior season here. I'm just not seeing a lot of obvious places that Shaw is going to play this season. Same thing with Trent Pierce and also the other young guys, Marcus Allen, T.O. Barrett, and Trent Burns. All 3 of those guys I think have potential. It's just hard to see a path to them getting real playing time this season with so many guys on this Missouri roster. So, number one, I think it's tough in general for teams to play 9 or 10 guys in college basketball when there's only 40 minutes in a game, especially if you're not playing at a lightning fast pace. And Dennis Gates has been kind of back and forth on pace so far during his coaching tenure at Missouri. To me, not only is that difficult, but you actually have really 15 guys who are essentially scholarship caliber players. How does that work out in the long run? I understand that rules-wise you can fit that amount of guys in there, but when you're just having 7 to 8 transfers and new freshmen come in each and every year, it just doesn't seem like that is a recipe for building cohesion, which ultimately without cohesion and chemistry and knowing where your teammates are going to be and all that good stuff, you're never, ever going to reach the highest level of potential basketball. That's all there is to it, because you can have the 5 best individuals in the world, but if they don't mesh together as a team, they're never going to reach their ceiling. That's just simply how basketball works. But regardless, looking forward to some Mizzou basketball coming up here in about, a little less than a month or so at this point, I believe. So, hey, we'll get to see what it all looks like here soon enough. And when it starts, I can't wait to start talking more Mizzou hoops, honestly. I've definitely missed it. Hopefully an SEC victory will be coming sooner rather than later. But you know what? I'll be getting you another podcast sooner rather than later. Tomorrow's program on Friday will have my official UMass preview, picks, the whole deal. So until then, I'll see you next time right here on Locked On Mizzou.